Oh, that's an option. Morning. June 26th, 9 a.m. I'll call to order the regular meeting of the Santa Cruz Metropolitan Transit District Board of Directors. Begin with a safety debrief by Gregory Strecker.
Good morning. In the event of emergency, we have two emergency exits. One directly behind the board of directors. You would go through that door directly out to the parking lot, and we would meet in the parking lot right directly next to the street. If that exit is blocked for whatever reason, then there's a secondary exit directly behind me. We walk out through the double doors, walk down the stairs, do not take the elevator, and meet again in the parking lot directly outside of the front door. In the event of roll call, at that point will be taken. In the event of an earthquake, drop cover and hold on. Remain in place until the shaking stops and evacuate only if it is safe to do so. In the event of a fire, again, evacuate immediately via the stairs if you're going out that particular emergency exit. Do not use the elevators, and then fire extinguishers are available for trained personnel. In the event of a medical emergency, notify the safety director or staff immediately. First aid kit and AED are available downstairs, and 911 will be contacted if it is needed. In the event of an active threat, run if it's safe to do so. Hide and silence devices if you cannot run, and fight only as last resort. Remember, stay calm, follow instructions, and prioritize your safety. Any questions? Thank you.
Have a roll call, please.
Director Downing? Here. Director Dietra?
Here.
Director Colin Johnson is absent. Director Koenig?
Here.
Director Leonore?
Here.
Director Lynn? Here. Director Martinez is absent. Director Newsom? Director Orbach? Here. Director Orozco is absent. Director Pagler?
Here.
Ex officio Director Marquez? I see her on the line. Here. Thank you. And ex officio Director Riskin.
Here.
And we have quorum.
Great, thank you. Today's meeting is being broadcast by community television of Santa Cruz County. Additionally, Language Line Services is providing Spanish interpretation services. Maria Avila is available for that. Maria, would you like to provide an announcement?
Hi, good morning. My name is Maria. I'm here for the Spanish interpretation. Mi nombre es María y estoy aquí para cualquier servicio de interpretación en español.
Gracias. We have any board of directors comments? Seeing none, I'll proceed with item 6, oral and written communications to the board of directors. Time is set aside for directors and members of the general public to address any items not on the agenda, which from the subject matter jurisdiction of the board. We have some folks here in the room. Go ahead.
Good morning, Eduardo Montesino. A few weeks ago, you had a planning and project standing committee. And again, there's no documentation of the presentation in the website or in the meeting. I was on Zoom. I was trying to get, there was no opportunity for the public to weigh in. After your comments, there were really good comments, but like I said, there was no given opportunity for the public to speak. So wanted to make you aware. And I also continue to encourage you to have meetings in other places. This is comfortable because it's really easy to get to for staff, but we need to be more engaged with the community. There's Watsonville, Scotts Valley, Capitola. There's other avenues so we can get more public, because as you see, hardly anybody from the public. There's a bus, but there's even no parking for visitors because they're all been taken for board members and reserved. So, like I said, the perception is that that you don't want to be opening up, and this is what we're trying to achieve. Our goal is to be more open to the public, getting our services out there and being more open-minded. Thank you.
Anyone else here in the room that wish to address the board? None. Anyone online?
Yeah, Brian.
Hi, This is Brian Peoples with Trail Now. I'm just following up with our letter that is in the package that talks about the RTC, which there are 3 members from the Metro Board on the RTC, and their continued waste of tax dollars on a train that is not feasible. But what I also wanted to highlight is our understanding there is some discussions being made internally within the RTC for a peace plan for segments 8 through 11, which essentially would increase the cost of building the trail. And this again demonstrates poor leadership on this board and the RTC and the overall political spectrum within Santa Cruz County. We can't continue to have what we refer to as reckless spending of our tax dollars on infrastructure projects that make no sense. And I will state now that if this peace plan, which basically increases the cost of building the trail, keeping the old tracks, moves forward, Trail Now will organize as a political action committee opposed to any future Metro tax measure. So it really is getting to a point where we're tired of the wasteful spending. And that would be very detrimental for our community for Trail Now to oppose the Metro tax measure because we don't want to do that. But I can assure you we will. And if you look at our record on the candidates that we have supported and those who have opposed, our record demonstrates a very wide support. So please, members of the Metro Board that are on the RTC board, please do not waste more money on an expensive trail by keeping the old tracks. Do not continue to take the role of listening to the train advocates who are preventing our community to moving forward. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Peoples. Is there anyone else?
No, there's someone else.
All right, we'll proceed to item 7, labor organization communications.
Eduardo Montesino, representing now PSA. I really want to thank the CEO for correcting, because 2 of my members in the budget were actually deemed to be demoted, and he corrected that effort. So I want to just thank you in public for those for that correction, because it was going to be life changing for those 2 individuals. So thank you.
Thank you. The other labor organization communications. Seeing none, we'll pursue item 8. Any additional documentation for existing agenda items?
There were 2 additional written communications sent to the board members last night and added to the agenda packet.
All right, thank you. Anything else? All right, we'll proceed with the consent agenda. Does any director have comments or questions about items on the consent agenda? Any member of the public wish to comment on the consent agenda? No one's here in the room. Is there anyone online? All right, I'll turn it to the board for action.
I move consent item 9.1 to 9.11.
I'd second that. We have a motion by Vice Chair Orbach, seconded by Director Pegler. Any further discussion? Call vote, please. Can we do a voice vote?
Voice, yeah. Nobody online,
Right.
so yeah.
All right, great. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Passed unanimously by those present. Proceed with the regular agenda and begin with presentation of employee longevity awards. We have a number of awards here for Nicholas Serrano, 5 years. Vincent Castillo, 10 years. Pedro Gutierrez, 20 years. Oscar Herrera, 20 years, and Jose Nanez, 25 years. Are any of the folks mentioned present? Well, we certainly appreciate all the service represented by these many longevity awards and look forward to the opportunity to celebrate with the mentioned employees too. And we also have a retiree, moving on to item 11, a retiree resolution of appreciation for Michael Miller, bus operator of 28 years. Mr. Miller present? Anyone wants to say anything on Mr. Miller's behalf?
I do, because I know that Michael Miller, I've been here, just shy of that years, been here 27 years. And, he's a great co-worker, great bus driver, and nicest person you could ever have. Very helpful to the public. So yeah, I think an opportunity to see him, but so an opportunity here to, acknowledge him for, all those hard years that, but it also shows, that Metro has been is a good place to work because and there's a lot of longevity, as you saw just in the acknowledgement before. And because we still have a veteran, I was just talking to him the other day, which I think he's at 41 or 42 years. That's a record, and we should acknowledge him, Mario Espinosa, because he's the longest working employee since here. He started, probably when he was a teenager. So thank you. It still looks good.
That's fantastic. Yeah.
We need a motion to,
We do.
I would make that motion to.
I'll second.
All right. Moved by Director Pegler, seconded by Director Downing to approve the resolution of appreciation for Mr. Michael Miller. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That passes unanimously by those present. All right, proceed with item 12 to approve introducing an ordinance imposing a 0.5% retail transactions and use tax for public transit purposes. They're calling a public hearing to adopt that ordinance. And for presentation, we're going to General Counsel Julie Sherman.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna briefly introduce the item. It's the introduction of an ordinance imposing 0.5% retail transaction and use tax. And also to consider calling a public hearing to adopt said ordinance. Staff is gonna make a presentation along with its election consultant and a member of my legal team that you all are aware of, Shayna Van Hopton, who's our election law expert. With that, I'm gonna hand it over to Court.
Right. Okay. Shannon.
Shayna.
Yes, I'm here.
All right, Shannon. Okay, Shannon, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, can you not see me?
No.
Camera's closed.
We
Okay.
can hear you. We can hear you fine. Just can't see you.
Oh, you know what? Maybe I've got my wrong camera. How
There
about
you
now?
are.
All right. The joys of having two cameras. Sorry about that. Good morning, board. I'm gonna ask the slide, move to the next slide. There we go. So what we're going to do today is provide some context for a discussion that has come to you in fits and starts over several months. We're going to talk a little bit about the legal context, the political context, and some past board discussions. For those who would like a refresher, I'm going to give a little bit of an update on a citizens initiative petition that's out in the field, a recap of some past polling, a very brief update on public outreach, and then get into the meat of it, which is consideration of an actual tax ordinance that is brought to you today for consideration to determine if you want to begin the process of putting it on the ballot for November 2026. Next slide.
Okay, so Reimagine Metro was first introduced in 2023. It was funded through a one-time state grant opportunity. The goal was to show the community what Metro could do with additional funding. We increased service by 35%. We saw, remarkable results that came from this additional service. As we provided it, the public used it there. There was anticipation at that time of going for a sales tax measure in 2024. The board ultimately decided not to pursue that because of competing measures that were on the ballot at the time. Now that funding that has funded Reimagine Metro will be used up in 2027. So we can't sustain the level of service that we have road. And at some point, we're gonna need to place that revenue source, that one-time revenue, or look at the extreme alternative of doing cuts. Go to the next slide. Control. Oh,
I'll
Shayna's
take this
controlling
one.
it? Oh, okay.
So we'll talk a little bit now about the legal context for what's happening here. In the way that the state sales tax rules work, local governments have a cap on the taxes that they can impose on a local basis on top of the state sales tax basis. So back in 2023, there was a successful legislative effort to increase the taxing capacity for Metro. And that created the ability for Metro to proceed with its own new sales tax of up to 0.5%, assuming a 2/3 voter approval. There's been quite a lot of back and forth going on in the legislature for the past several years about whether that 2/3 approval could be diminished to 50% plus one in case of a citizens initiative. And state law does provide for a path for certain citizens initiatives to be put on the ballot and approved by a 50% plus one vote. However, there has to be something in an agency's enabling statute that describes their election procedures. It's unclear whether Metro's own enabling statute provides sufficient authority for that process. And so AB 1919 was introduced this year by your local delegation to clarify that yes, Metro is eligible to take advantage of the Citizens Initiative petition 50% plus one threshold. And that is working its way through the legislature, but has not yet passed. If it passes, it would be an urgency bill, which means it would take effect sooner than January 1. So that hypothetically speaking, were a citizens initiative put on the ballot this November, it could be approved. On the same ballot in November, late breaking news in the last about 16 hours, there will be a new statewide constitutional amendment placed before the voters that will allow the voters to withdraw the ability for citizens initiatives to pass with a 50% plus one threshold. So ACA 22 was approved by the legislature last night. And if it takes effect, it will mean that the 50% plus one path will end on January 1st, 2027. So where that leaves us right now is that if AB 1919 passes very quickly, legally there is a clear path for a citizens initiative. However, having a legal path doesn't necessarily equate to a political path. So we are in a very awkward situation of knowing that we can proceed now or in the future with a ballot measure that your board puts onto the ballot that could pass with a 2/3 vote of the public. We believe that there is a path to a 50% plus one threshold citizens measure legally this fall. However, unclear that there's actually any way that a political path exists. It seems like not. And then after January 1st, 2027, it is an open question as to whether the voters of California will continue to allow citizens initiative measures to pass with 50% plus one. So we will know in a few months whether a citizens initiative is a viable option after this November. That was probably confusing to folks. Late breaking news. If you have questions on that, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, we can move to the next slide.
I have a question. So I just want to clarify, because yes, you're correct. I mean, it's confusing. If AB 19 does not get through the legislature, then come January 1st, that 50 plus one goes away. If it gets through the legislature, then it has a pathway of getting on the ballot for the voters to decide whether or not that is an option.
Not necessarily. Absent a statewide constitutional amendment, AB 1919 passing would create a very clear path legally to the ballot. However, so what happened was the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association was circulating and got sufficient signatures to place a statewide measure on the ballot that would do away with 50% plus one measures statewide. There was a very big rush yesterday in the state legislature. And what happened is the Howard Jarvis taxpayers have agreed to pull their measure in exchange for the legislature putting on their own measure that is more narrow, but for our purposes, it has the same effect of eliminating, regardless of AB 1919, any legal path for a 50% plus one special tax. That
So
path
the-
would be
the-
conclusively removed.
So the narrowing of that, in effect, does the same thing.
Right. It makes a difference for certain taxes and real property related fees, taxes, assessments that you all that are on city and county boards might deal with. But for special districts, we only can do special taxes. And there was no compromise related to special district taxes. All special district taxes now would be conclusively limited to a 2/3 voter approval.
Okay. Thank you.
If the voters approve ACA 22 in November.
I mean, so either way, it looks pretty bad. I mean, Blake, I mean.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Either way, it looks pretty bad for a citizens initiative after January 1st of 2027.
But I know this just happened yesterday, it sounds like, but have we talked to our state lobbyists about the likelihood of that kind of measure passing in November?
Yes, it's really unclear because this is a new measure and it was done by a compromise deal cut by the legislature. It passed overwhelmingly. In the Senate, there was only one no vote, which was Scott Wiener. So it does seem like there's a high likelihood that any sort of coalition to fight the taxpayer initiative has been weakened by the legislature making this compromise, but we won't know until the politics play out. We'll probably start seeing statements as early as today so that we can see where the campaign supporters and opponents are going to line up.
Thanks, that's unfortunate.
Not a great day yesterday for special districts seeking additional revenue measures. All right, no more questions. We can move to the next slide. So I was with you all a couple months ago in winter, starting in late 25 and early 26. We came to you and provided substantial information on various paths to increase your revenue, whether through sales tax or other means. As we made clear, the only way to really get in enough revenue to make a difference for maintaining your service is a district-wide sales tax. So we proposed to you what a sales tax ordinance might look like and came to you with all sorts of components of a tax in January. You looked through the components of a potential tax, you provided input, we went to the board, we went to committees, and we came up with the components of a measure, but not an actual measure. Because polling was not super promising, the board opted to sit tight and wait on moving a measure forward. But there have been ongoing conversations about your fiscal situation, about what it costs to maintain your current service and how long your reserves can carry you forward without an infusion of new revenues. And on June 12th, the Finance and HR Standing Committee met to discuss this further and directed staff to come to you today to bring a potential tax measure to this board to be placed on the ballot in November for consideration by the voters, understanding that it would require a 2/3 majority to pass. Next slide. While this has been happening, there has been a private group that developed the Friends of Santa Cruz Metro and began to circulate a petition that would put a measure on at a 50% +1 threshold. The group was not able to gather sufficient signatures to qualify for the ballot. And we are now at a point where if there will be a measure on the ballot this November, it's really relying on you as a board to make that choice. So the Friends of Santa Cruz Metro may be looking ahead to a future election cycle, but with the changes in Sacramento as recently as yesterday, and the potential approval of ACA 22, which only requires a 50% +1 vote, they may not have a path to do that by a citizens initiative. So we are in a quandary. Next. Okay. Hopefully Jared is either in the room or on Zoom. I'm going to turn the next set of slides over to Jared Boykin from Team Civics. Jared, are you here?
I don't see him online yet.
Okay. Corey, Danielle, what would you like to do? Danielle, do you want to take this next chunk?
Yeah, just message Jared.
Okay.
Later, I'll just say.
Okay, well, while we wait for Jared to respond to Danielle, does anyone have any other questions on what we just talked about?
Just to be clear, if ACA 22 on the ballot only requires 50% +1 in order to pass, like the constitutional amendment?
That's right. Yes. There was initially, if the legislature had not made this deal yesterday, there was a different measure that the legislature had put on the ballot that would have required a passage of any limitation on taxing authority to be tied to the highest percentage of a tax that would be disallowed. So it was written very complicated. It was a very short, but it was complicated. Essentially, absent yesterday's activity, we would have had the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Group initiative on the measure in November, and also a different state constitutional amendment that would have required the taxpayers measure to pass with a 2/3 majority. When they made this compromise yesterday and narrowed the taxpayer protection measure that's going on the ballot, the legislature took another action to remove the vote threshold change for the taxpayer measure from the ballot. Pretty complicated wrangling. It all happened very fast yesterday, but we were, for as far as Metro is concerned, you were in better shape 48 hours ago than you are right now. But this compromise was made for other reasons related to property taxes. There was initially in the taxpayer measure a retroactivity clause that was going to go back and undo certain real property related taxes that have previously been approved at less than a 2/3 majority. The retroactivity clause was removed from the proposal in this compromise made between the Taxpayers Association and the legislature. So it's not, it's not a total loss for cities and counties, because there are some things that cities and counties got out of the compromise, but the compromise was not helpful to special districts.
They have a question. They must have, in order, if the legislature is compromising, then they must be aware of some sort of internal polling or how, on the measure, especially since it got all of the signatures it needed. That means people were actually signing it. So they're trying to probably lessen the blow, I would imagine.
That's right. Yeah. Eliminating the retroactivity and changing the way that real property related taxes and other revenues are addressed is a win for cities and counties, perhaps. I mean, it's a balancing act. They win on some and they lose on some. Because we're a transportation district, a transit district that only has one purpose, all of our taxes are special taxes that are negatively impacted by ACA 22 if it passes.
Jared's on the line now, Shayna.
Okay. Gonna turn off my mic. Jared, can we get a sound check from you?
Yeah, hi all.
All right, you're up.
Yeah, happy to be with you. Apologies, I have prior commitments this morning that ended just at 9:30, so I'm happy to be able to join you now. And yes, to the prior question, I would just add that my understanding is that while the title and summary of the Jarvis measure that had qualified for the ballot was not particularly favorable and did not pull well on the face of it, there was significant concern that the polling showed it could climb and win voter support with a strong enough campaign. And of course, you know, it was fully expected that it would be well funded. So I think that was some of the motivating factor behind the compromise discussions that have been frantically taking place over the last few days in Sacramento. And is it a good compromise or not? Obviously depends on where you sit. But there you have it. I know Shayna gave you all a summary of it. And it still will need to be approved by voters this fall. The compromise itself will end up on the ballot as its own state proposition among all the other state props this fall, but presumably without any serious organized opposition and presumably with favorable title and summary. So, okay, circling back to Metro, we wanted to just kind of give, as we consider our own potential local ballot measure, obviously in a 2/3 context, we wanted to just kind of recap some of the polling that's been over the last few years. One thing that I think is really useful to point out is that over time, with some of the excellent communications that you all do internally, favorability ratings have been climbing, which is good news. So we're going to look at some trends in the polling that don't necessarily, match the same curve, but it's good to know from the outset that nobody's thinking ill of what you do as an agency. In fact, quite the opposite. They actually really have good numbers and improving numbers even of what you do as an agency and how, they approve of your, management of money, et cetera. Next slide, please. So attitudes towards public transit. And this is, I believe, the most recent voter survey from EMC. Danielle, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's where this is pulled from. And so, you can see 5 out of 6 Santa Cruz County voters agree that it's important, even it benefits everyone, even people who don't ride it. And those numbers, you can see they sort of vary slightly. It's about 3/4 of the non-riders who agree with that statement, and nearly everybody who rides it monthly agrees with that statement, monthly or more, or at least someone in their household does. So we usually do see some differences between riders and non-riders in this data. This is a minor difference, but one that's interesting to look at. Next slide, please. So there have been basically 3 surveys over the last 3.5 years, or 3 years plus, testing the possibility of a absent sales tax measure to fund your services. This was done by FM3 Research back in March of 2023. That does seem like a long time ago in light of other current political events, et cetera. And the results on the next slide, please, showed us sort of within a striking range, if you will, of a 2/3 outcome. We're going to see a couple of these type of polling progressions, so I'm just going to pause for a second to remind you what this slide means. The initial vote that pollsters like FM3 and EMC Research use is when they give a pretty cold read to the respondent, either by phone or most of the time these are online surveys nowadays, but they're sample controlled. unique respondent kind of links, for statistical validity. But they give a cold read of the sample ballot question as we presented it on the prior slide. That's called the initial vote. Then they present more information about what the money would do and some arguments in favor, generally some good reasons for doing it. And that shows kind of what's the growth potential of the conversation, with voters. And then they introduce opposing arguments, reasons not to do it potentially, just to test the resilience of a measure like this. And that's, best practices in polling of this nature. And so we're going to see a few different slides that show this, what we call vote progression. So here from the FM3 research survey, you could see the initial vote was at 64%. The second vote after information got us right to that 2/3 and then back down again to 54% at that point. And then that was in 2023. So there was some talk about potentially a 2024 measure. So let's go to the next slide. In June of 2024, as we got close to the deadline for putting it on the ballot, it was tested again. Let's check that one. Next slide. And the numbers had fallen pretty significantly. And I think that, may have been done to some affordability issues or other kinds of things that were happening in the county. This is, leading into, the presidential election. Obviously, that's a pretty strong drop in support. And so I think it makes sense that the board and the, district leadership was a little bit less optimistic about the chances of success in November 2024 after looking at that polling trend. So you can see the same vote progression slide here, but everything, running about 9 points lower than it had a year earlier or 15 months earlier in March of 2023. Next slide, please. So then in November of 2025, with a slightly different methodology from a different pollster, EMC Research, we tested two different versions of a measure. One that sort of, elaborated a little bit more on all the different kinds of transit benefits that y'all have. And then one that was what we called simplified, which was, hey, let's just say this is about transit because people kind of know what transit is. And let's not, clutter it up with too much detail and just see if, hey, let's just support our local transit because we care about it because we're an environmentally conscious community. We understand transit's important. So we tested both of those versions. And on the next slide, you can see there was not much difference between the two versions. Our again, in the odd year, November 2025, our support had rebounded a little bit back up into the low 60s from the mid 50s where it was as we were in June of 2024. And there wasn't really significant difference between the two ballot question models, although slightly more detail seems to be slightly stronger. So, that was a good thing to learn is that we do want to give a little bit more information in the ballot question. And so that's the strategy we've been following as we've been proceeding. But in neither case did either measure get to the 2/3 mark here. What we've shown on the slide, the 62 and 60% is the high watermark of support that was gauged in the survey, in each of these two surveys for the ballot measure. So that's not quite within the margin of error to 2/3. And then next slide, please. So that's the most recent polling that we have, somewhere between these kind of high 50s, low 60s range, with some good guidance about how to write ballot questions. Summary of public outreach. Let's go to the next slide. And Danielle, do you want me to do this or did you want to kind of summarize the work? Corey, did you want to summarize the work here?
I mean, simply we've done a number of meetings of outreach, trying to update boards and organizations on the success of Santa Cruz Metro and the status of where we're at and talking about the one-time funding running out and the decisions that are for Metro to how to move forward on that. So.
Yeah, and these were, again, this is, what we'd consider best practices for preparing for a potential ballot measure is you do polling, obviously, for, so you understand what all the likely voters think, but you also have to do, community engagement in a what you might call grass tops way, right? Not exactly grassroots, but you have to get out into, you got to talk to civic leaders and involved community groups, et cetera. And Corey and team done a nice job, having conversations in depth. These are our funding needs. These are our opportunities and challenges. These are our successes. This is what we've been doing. So that's happened quite a bit over the last, year plus. Next slide, please.
Jared, I have a question on kind of what you were just talking about. Those were done 23, 24, 25. Since November of 25, a lot has happened. Gas prices has skyrocketed. I know that cities and municipalities, Watsonville included, we have extremely raised our rates on people for their utilities. Costs have just gone up. Do you think that voters would be in the same position as they were in November 26th? I'm voting on like a measure like this than they are today?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we obviously do not have more recent polling for our voters specifically on this specific issue. So I don't want to overstate, what we know versus what we, guess. I will say that around the state where we have the benefit of testing ballot measures in this way, where we tested a tax or a bond measure in 2025, and we came back and did a tracking survey in spring or early summer of 2026, we have generally seen a decline in support from the 2025 numbers. Sometimes the decline is small, 2 to 3 points. In some cases, it's been more dramatic. But in most cases, we have seen, a decline for those reasons. It is also possible that things are going to shift back a little bit if, in fact, inflation or gas prices, abate. If some of those concerns abate between now and November. I'm not an economist. I don't have a crystal ball, but I think your point is well taken that between fall of 25 and spring, late summer of 2026, we generally have seen a slight decline, in support for measures like this in other parts of the state where we have the benefit of tracking data.
Thank you, Jared.
Question also, Jared, the polling that was done, at least the most recent one, had a sunset date. And what's proposed here initially, at least, does not have a sunset date. And obviously, this is a structural issue, so it'd be much better for the agency to not need a sunset date. And though I presume you don't have local polling, generally speaking, my understanding is that can impact favorability for sales tax measures like this. Do you have a sense of how much of a factor the board should consider that to be for this measure?
Yeah, I mean, the next slide that we're about to get into talks a little bit about sort of the strategic analysis, for approaching the measure this year. I think a good takeaway for all of us is that the polling suggests that 2/3, would take some, kind of fortunate bounces of the ball in November of 2026. So I think there's logic to consider and that there isn't sort of an automatic, I don't think we could automatically say that adding a sunset is going to magically give us 7 points or 10 points of benefit. So I think there's logic, honestly, either way. On the one hand, you could say, well, let's add a sunset to try and give ourselves every chance we can at avoiding opposition and give ourselves a good chance. The other hand, some of the logic behind going in 2026, even with the poll results as they are, is the concept of just putting our needs in front of voters in a really transparent and honest way, and just making sure everybody understands, this is what we need and this is the long-term reality. And knowing that, 2/3 right now is not what's in the poll, but, we could just lay out the case and try to be really thorough about that. And in that case, honestly, going without a sunset is probably truer for what you need in the long term, right? So, using the analysis of, look, 2026, a measure this year isn't necessarily supported by 2/3 in the polling, but it offers us a chance to just make the case to voters that we need this money. In that sense, going without the sunset is a truer statement of your total policy need, I think, is how I would look at it.
Thank you.
And maybe while we're going through the next portion of the discussion, I don't know, Jared, if you have easy access to the EMC report. I'm trying to remember if we did any testing on sunset versus not sunset. I know some of my clients have recently, and the traditional thought of it getting 2-3 points at the poll has not necessarily borne out in all environments. Some agencies have definitely found through their polls that having no sunset versus a 30-year sunset really doesn't make a difference anymore. It's not a clear rule anymore that you add a sunset, you gain 3 points.
Yeah, no, we did not test it in these surveys. I think some of the ones, Shana, that you're referring to, you have big enough sample size, you can do lots of different testing and different permutations. We haven't had those kinds of sample sizes for these polls. I will say that I agree with what Shana said here. 30 years is not a meaningful sunset to a voter. That sounds just as long as forever. So there's no reason, I think, to do that one. I would say the benefit of like a 10 or a 15-year sunset is that if opponents emerge and they say, there's no accountability for this money, how do we know you're going to spend it wisely? You don't ever have to come back to us. If you have a 10 or 15-year sunset, you can say, yes, we have some time to prove ourselves, and then we have to, show up again. But on the natural in the ballot language, I don't think you get a benefit. It's really in the context of potential opposition. If you have no sunset and opponents emerge and say there's no accountability here, you can say, you just have to say, we're going to live on our performance. You know who we are, what we do. But you can't rebut that argument directly by saying, yes, we have to come back to voters. You have to stand on, we have a record of being a transit agency that does good transit. So I think that's really how the sunset dynamic works in practice. Okay, so the next slide, we're going to get to the ordinance, et cetera. We have a couple slides here that talk a little bit. I think the next one after this is mine to talk a little bit about some of the political considerations. And then I think we have a slide from Corey on the sort of more financial considerations. And then Sheena and her team are going to talk a little bit about the ordinance itself. So obviously to go in November 2026, as we've been discussing, in order to win, we would have to overperform our polling. I think we all recognize we don't have a poll that says we're going to hit 2/3, and we haven't quite been close to the margin of error for 2/3 in these most recent polls. So we'll have to overperform. To win? Is there a private group prepared to do all that? With the fundraising, the volunteer energy, is there do you feel in the community a groundswell of energy and support to do this? That's a question I think you all will have to answer for yourselves as you see it. I don't think I can really answer that question for you, but that's an important consideration, to be successful this fall. Do we think the economy will bounce back? I'm not an economist. How do we think voters will feel? It has been a very dynamic time in the last 6 months in our country. Could it change again? Maybe. The potential impact of 2 countywide funding measures on the same ballot, I don't think it's, final or official yet, but I know that there's definitely the county itself has been moving really, working very hard to try and get special legislation to qualify a 0.5-cent sales tax to help protect some of the health and human services programs that have been threatened by some of the federal budget cuts, and that could likely appear on the same ballot. sort of making the same case to voters, here's health and human services issues, here's transit services threatened also. And then obviously, you have the cost of the election. I'm going to say one more thing on these slides here that are, it's sort of not written, but kind of my, just analysis for you all. Obviously, the polling suggests it's going to be hard for us to win this year if we go. It is, there is a school of thought that it's important to put the measure out, even if you're not necessarily going to win, because people have to really understand the urgency and they have to know that you're working hard and trying every angle to solve and meet the urgent problem. And, there's validity to that school of thought for sure. If it's not successful, some people will ask some tough questions about losing. There have been agencies in the county that have failed, bond measures for, Cabrillo College comes to mind. I think they've gotten majorities for the 2 bond measures that have lost, but they haven't gotten 55%. That's the last 2 times they've tried. You yourselves as observers in the community can assess, what kind of questions has that raised for that institution? Has that helped them? Has that not been constructive? What's been the result of that in the discussion in the community around that for them? You may face some of the same questions if you go and you're not successful. Obviously, whatever fundraising and volunteer energy that goes into 2026, if we're not successful, would have to, be re-upped and maybe redoubled. So, can we count on people trying again and helping? And then the last point I wanted to leave you with is, if we do this in 2026, and I know Corey's going to give you guys some more detail here about the budget considerations and the very real threats over the next several years that you face to your budget. We all know that voters don't come and sit in rooms like this and study budgets, with people like you who do, they elect people like you to take the time to study budgets so that they don't have to, right? So that they don't have the same detailed understanding of, your budget situation and the nuances of smart government planning, right? Voters have their own household finances to plan and they don't focus on it. So if we go out this year and we put too much emphasis on the threat of cuts, and if we're not successful and those cuts do not get made, there's a potential risk to the credibility of the agency. And we saw in one of the earlier slides, you actually are highly credible and your credibility has been climbing. People think really highly of the agency. So, one consideration that I just want to, make sure we're all aware of is that we want to be, understanding that 100,000, 120,000 likely voters are not going to, wade through our budget documents and process a lot of this with great nuance. We have to be thoughtful about how we message the potential for future budget cuts versus the potential for urgent and immediate budget cuts if we put a measure on in 2026. And if it's not successful and is not followed by significant, budget cuts, that I think would have an impact as well on sort of your credibility in the community. So I just want to kind of put that on the table as well. Then the next slide, I think, Corey, is yours to talk a little bit more about the budget.
So just to be clear, we've never talked about drastic cuts in 26. So it's always, the conversation's always been that we would have to do cuts if in the future, looking at March 28, because that's kind of been the target for the past 6 months of what we've been talking about. So, but that is a real something real that we have to think about. But I don't know that if we proceed in 26 and we talk about the future cuts that would have to happen if we don't find another funding source, it doesn't have to be, we just have to message it correctly. Them to understand, what, when and how it would look like if something didn't pass. So right now, if we wait until 28, we are proposing a budget today, later, that that maintains the 100% level of service that we have now. No layoffs of any staff. Allow us to proceed through service through the end of fiscal year 28, which would be June 30th of 2028. Now, by doing that, we keep the full level of service, but we also draw down all of our available cash, our reserves. So at that point, if there is not a long-term funding source replacement, then we're talking about significant service cuts and layoffs, well over 40% at that point. What we've been, waiting, the 28 goal has been really heavily dependent upon the Friends of Santa Cruz Metro having a successful signature gathering effort that would allow it to be put on at the lower threshold of 50+1. As we've learned today, that may be really in jeopardy. And so that's something that we haven't been discussing, and something that we now need to take into account as we think about how we proceed moving forward. Moving forward in 26, Jared really covered most everything, those bullet points already, so I'm not going to rehash it. But there are the advantages of waiting to 28 have changed significantly in the past 24 hours.
Just to the last point Jared made, which relates to the last bullet on 26. It's like he was maybe suggesting we would need to develop that strategy now before November and be ready to execute it should the measure be unsuccessful in November. Is that what you would be recommending?
So we definitely have to come up with a messaging strategy. My proposal and what we're seeing in the budget is that we continue Reimagine Metro for as long as we can, and keep that voter. If we cut service, we're definitely going to lose votes. Right, there'll be less support for Santa Cruz Metro moving forward. If we can keep the same level of service and be successful, I mean, that's what the big focus is for. But it's going to really be dependent upon how we message, and then also the advocacy effort that happens on the other side. So the private funding that comes along with that would be needed to do that portion of advocacy on behalf of Metro.
Both things.
Yeah,
I mean,
if
so just I was thinking, you brought up both things. We know the support is important, but we also need to remember the funding sources too. So that part I hadn't been focused on.
Go ahead, Jared.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just wanted to elaborate on what Corey said in response to the question. Is I think my point is that we do not want to over threaten, if you will, cuts in the short term if we're not doing that. So, knowing that we have a funding problem here, but it's also not a funding problem that's going to take place immediately. That is a bit of a messaging challenge. It's hard to go to voters with an urgent funding measure when for us urgency is 3 years, but that's government planning. That's not how average households think of urgent funding. 3 years is not urgent. So, we just, as we talk about it in the community, we have to be measured in our, conversation, because if the impression people are left with is that it's urgent and there will be significant cuts if we don't pass it, and then it doesn't pass, and that isn't what happens, that will hurt your credibility. So as Corey said, it's a messaging challenge that, what feels urgent to us because we can see the budget horizon in 2.5 years, that's not the same as how voters hear the word urgent. Right? For them, that's immediate.
Could it be presented as we are being prudent and responsible, not waiting for it to be urgent? Would that be a good way of proposing that to the public? Because
yeah,
we're being very careful managers. We're looking ahead. We've done everything we could to reach this point, but we are here now. And we are looking at, way ahead where the public, if we got to the message is urgent, a lot of people would say, well, how'd you get there? Weren't you paying attention? Were you planning ahead? So could that be one of the messages of this ballot initiative?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the kind of nuance you'll have to include in your messaging. And again, I just am not sure if that kind of messaging is gonna help us make up the gap between what our poll says we have versus the 2/3 we need. But clearly, if we go into this November 2026 election with a measure on the ballot, we're gonna have to lean into that sort of correct and nuanced budget strategy messaging and know that it may be, hard to bridge the gap between what our poll says we have and the 2/3 we need to pass with messaging that's nuanced and more complex and accurate versus, the kinds of things people often say, with ballot measures. But I agree that that's how we would have to do it, right? We would not want to overstate the case.
Anything further you want to present, either Jared or Shayna? Or
There's a couple more slides.
We're not done quite.
I have a question really quick. So if I'm correct, I mean, all you've been showing us is that if this doesn't pass, then next year, March of next year, we have to make many cuts. Am I not understanding that?
That's not what I've been proposing. I'm talking,
So if this doesn't pass, when will those major cuts
So-
happen?
we have, if it is put on the ballot in November and it's unsuccessful, we still have time to go at least one more time in front of the voters.
Were you not listening to the presentation? That is gonna be impossible. I mean, but it looks like the legislature is gonna make a deal that's gonna keep us from ever getting that measure.
our board has the ability to put the measure on this fall or in 2028. And we don't, I mean, as was
But it
discussed,
will be 2/3.
that's correct.
Have you seen, we're not even close to 2/3.
But to your previous question, the cuts are last, we have to make cuts basically by the end of fiscal year 2028. So that is really like between the March, June 2028 timeframe. If we have not passed this sales tax measure by then, that's sort of when we see major changes in this agency, but not
But we're gonna have to deplete our reserves. Am I missing something, or do we not dip into our reserves to make this work?
sure. I mean, we're using reserves now.
Exactly. We're gonna deplete our reserves though. I just wanna make sure I'm clear on this. If we're not depleting our reserves, then yeah, go ahead. We can live happily ever after until 2028. But I wanna know, are we depleting our reserves to get there?
Chuck available to speak to that?
Just.
Yeah, I mean,
Let's get back to that after we finish the presentation.
Okay, you want to move to the next slide? We'll go through the last slide, couple slides. So we've put a measure out for your consideration. And this is the question. So this question takes into account the various lessons from the polling and the conversations that we had together in January to come up with the various components of a measure. And this is where we are. So if we proceed, the current version of the ballot question that is for you for consideration is on the screen. I'm going to let you read. Okay, so as we move forward to the next slide, the question is, what do you want to do with that? So the proposal from staff at this time is to go ahead and introduce an ordinance that would call for that ballot question to be placed before the voters so that they could opt to impose a sales tax with no sunset, funding transit, protecting your service indefinitely. Voting today to introduce and call a public hearing is the first step of putting a measure on the ballot, not the last step of putting a measure on the ballot. So introducing the ordinance today would begin the process of bringing you back in July at a special meeting to hold a public hearing. So as soon as this meeting is over, we would proceed to publish that notice of hearing and open the public comment process so that we can find out what the public that's paying attention thinks about proceeding to put a sales tax on the ballot in November. We then would bring you back on July 13th, which seems to be the date that is the highest likelihood of being able to get folks together in the middle of the summer. We would have a special meeting, we would hold a hearing, and you could then take the action, if you chose to do so, of putting the measure on the ballot. You would do that by adopting the ordinance, knowing that it would be subject to confirmation by the vote of 2/3 of your public. At the same time, we would ask you to approve a resolution that calls the election and seeks consolidation of our special election with the general election by the County Board of Supervisors. The timing on this is very, very tight. August 7th is 88 days out from Election Day, which means it is the legal limit for when the Board of Supervisors can put items on the ballot, and their meeting to consider such requests is on August 4th. So again, this is the first step of a 3-meeting process. The second meeting would be our meeting, a special meeting of the Board of Directors. The third meeting would be the County Board of Supervisors meeting on August 4th to accept our request to consolidate the election so that our item is on the ballot in November. So that's the process. And at this point, I'm not sure, maybe someone on staff can explain exactly where you can find the ordinance. But we have time now between today and around July, I don't know, maybe 8th or so, to make adjustments to the language before you would take action on the 13th. You could still make amendments on the 13th. You could listen to what folks say in the public hearing. If indeed we get useful comments about wording changes, we can take those at that meeting. But today is the first opportunity for you to provide input on the ordinance if you wish to do so. You also can just choose to take an action today to either proceed or not proceed, and then spend some time with the written ordinance to make sure that it includes the words that you're hoping it includes. So if we can go to the next slide, I think that is it. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back to Corey to see what the conversation flow is going to be from here on out.
So you got a lot of information given to you to think about, ponder. Last night you received the ordinance, an email for you to take a look at. Now the board needs to decide how we want to proceed.
Director Lind.
Well, the point that Jared made, and I've seen it in our community, is that even though we may look and say coming up in November is not likely to pass, and we look at it that way, what I've seen is exactly what Jared said, that awareness. There's some value to that. We've had a school board measure that came for us, didn't pass the first time. Then it got everyone's attention, and the second time it passed actually strongly. So I can even though there's expense, the value of that awareness does ring true for me. Your point, Sharon. So we know we're facing an uphill battle, but I don't see that we have other options. And all we can do is hope we can all work together and gain community support and what we're seeing in the increase, 40% increase in ridership recently, I believe.
72.
72%, even. So that's what I think is going to be important, that we don't do anything between now and the election that will maybe lose that support and promote that, the success that, as we imagine what it's doing, use those sales points and these parts of being able to continue it. So I see value of the November. My thoughts.
I mean, my understanding now is that even if we get all the signatures for the citizens initiative, which our volunteers have been hustling to get more than 10,000 signatures to date, if the 2/3 threshold pass this November, we would still need 2/3 to pass in 2028. It seems our options are narrowing by the day, and we will be forced to make harder and harder decisions because we failed to act before. I'm not sure it's responsible to delay once more. I think it's clear to me that if we don't act now, we'll lose our only option to bring this before the voters this November because of the timeline. Our decisions have real impacts to this organization, to our staff, and to our community. And Metro belongs to this community. So there's an argument here that the voters should decide the fate of Metro before we decide on significant service cuts that will impact them. And we have an opportunity to be completely honest and transparent to our voters about our fiscal cliff that's coming. And services cost money. We know we have this structural deficit that we alone cannot fix. Only the voters can. I just want to make sure we're talking about this and making the best decision for Metro.
Thank you. Director Paglich.
I agree with Directors Lind and Orbach. I want to underscore the value and benefit of credibility. And I think the fact that we have been aware of and discussed a fiscal cliff, I think was the term that Chuck has used, for quite some time now. We know it's out there. This is not an unknown to us that caught us by surprise. We've been seeing it, planning it, and doing our very best to try and find a path forward. And I'm leaning toward making the attempt in November to try it now with extra time after that, and being very clear and honest, transparent about the potential impact should it fail and when those cuts would occur, even if they are months or year ahead.
Echoing what all of you said, in addition to that, if you look in the Wayback Machine, the previous century, Transportation Commission and other transportation goals, about 25% of our population use transit. We're not there, but I keep that in the back of my mind whenever I am speaking with the public. I have done a couple of presentations to school boards and other organizations. And what I've found is this sort of, oh, I had no idea. People don't know anything about us because they're all working all day, except the people that come here or bother to read our agendas and minutes or watch us on YouTube. And what I found in the discussions is that people really appreciate how prudent it's been. When I describe our buses and how senior they are and how much we have just been squeezing what we can out of them and talking about what we have done and what we've accomplished with what we have, that makes a big impression on people. So I would like to go ahead and put forward a motion to approve this, but I also need the board, each of us, to say, we're raising our hand and we're going to go out there and not only educate the public, but use the opposition information as our tool to educate them, to overcome those things that happen once they find out what the downsides are. Because I think that in our discussions here with the public, a lot of people are like, I don't want any more taxes, go away. And you're going to have those people. But once you tell people what they're getting and what they're keeping, it really, they just value it and they want it.
And so when you explain, yeah, there are 6 people on this bus, but that's 6 cars that aren't sitting in front of you in traffic, then drivers were the people we really need to convince. People that are not ever gonna take a bus to understand that. So that's incumbent upon us to do. And I'm ready for it, so. I don't have a gavel, but I'm. I have one more thing.
You got the public.
Just a quick show.
Oh, go ahead, go ahead.
Oh, no,
No,
no.
go. You go.
Well,
Yeah.
you made a point. With all the housing that we're, in our cities, we're having people, where are these guys? I mean, I know we're all hearing it. Where are they gonna park? And even Selena said, well, the state's leaving it to the cities to figure out how to get cars off the road. That's a message we can sell too, because that's resonating in my community is, you're building a lot. Yeah, well, someone's building without going through us. But anyway.
I just like to, well, thank you for the presentation, but I'd like to encourage all our board members to, let's move forward with this measure and continue working for our metro drivers, our mechanics, our maintenance people, and they need us here and now. And I know that this is a risk that we're taking, but I think moving forward, we're gonna send that message that, we need this extra push, nudge, yeah. So, and I just feel like a lot of our families are gonna be affected by this if we decide not to move forward. So I say, let's go forward and thank you.
Director Risker.
Yeah, I guess just, I would support the board taking the action today to introduce the ordinance, and just a reminder that a vote today is not putting it on the ballot. A vote against, though, is foreclosing the opportunity. So I think the healthy skepticism is certainly warranted, but particularly given new information in the last 24 hours, I would hope that we can at least advance the conversation to mid-July to make a decision. I did have 2 specific language questions about the ordinance, if those would be the appropriate time. One in terms of the ballot question itself, that I didn't understand the last line. It says requiring public spending oversight, and then it says / locally controlled funds. Understand what the / locally controlled funds means. That's one question. Seems confusing. And then second, there's a language in terms of implementation that says not less than 180 days after the vote. And I'm not sure why, that seems long. Most March measures go into effect July 1. So I don't know, this is just a small kind of cash flow issue, but I don't know if we'd be hamstringing ourselves more than necessary. So I don't know if that 180 day language has some basis in law. If not, I would suggest reducing it.
I'm not sure if you want me to respond to that, but I certainly can. I'll start with the easier question of 180 days. That's standard Department of Tax and Fee Administration language. I'll see if we can make it any less precise and still get through their approval process. So I'll take a look at that with the CDTFA, but the 180 days is kind of our standard language. In terms of the ballot question, I don't know if we can put the measure language back up on the screen. If not, I have it on my screen and I can put it up. Just get, okay, there we go. Let's go back, I think 2 slides. Yep, one more. Okay, there we go. So we're limited to 75 words, and we're currently at 73 with this ballot question. And when you do the counting, when you count this, you're going to say, oh, I think it's 78 or whatever. That's okay. It's because Santa Cruz County and Santa Cruz County, Santa Cruz Metro Transit District, each of those is considered one word. So there are some counting nuances. So we don't have a lot of room to play with. We could make some changes in that last line. So the public spending oversight
That's clear.
is clear. The locally controlled funds, I see how it does seem like maybe that's a little bit out of left field. We do have maintained local transit funding that state and federal governments cannot touch. So it may be that we can make some adjustments to that. I don't know, Jared, if you want to, we can take some time to look at that together, or if you want to try to do it on the fly. But I definitely recognize what Director Eskin is saying. I see that.
I would definitely recommend against doing it on the fly, but we can certainly, if that's the sense of the group, we can go back and take a look at the end of the language and see what we could do to make it even stronger.
I would just like to ask if that's necessary for today's vote.
Right, we can
I
decide
think
on the
that-
final language at the July 13th meeting, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
You can take the public's input into account and you can make revisions. We can also take comments either here or in the coming days to try to bring back to you an ordinance that reflects some adjustments, and we'll do it in a red line so you can see what we did between this meeting and the next meeting. And then when you consider action in July, we can button down exactly what every word is going to be if there are changes. So we can provide some options, we can bracket out some adjustments. We've got 2 weeks, a little less, right? So we've got a little bit of time.
Thank you. Any other comments? Dr. Dusha?
Thank you. Donna, I do disagree. We do have other options. We can live within our budget that we are told to be budgeting within. That is another option we could be doing. And we can also provide the best service we can within that budget. That is what the public requires of us to do. That's what we should be doing. The Board of Supervisors, would you guys, because if it comes to you, do you automatically put it through? Or could there be a chance that there would be Board of Supervisors who would think, well, we're gonna have a competing measure. I don't want to see both measures and vote against it, or does it automatically go through? How does that work? I'm not sure.
It's a good question, actually. I mean, can legal counsel comment on that? Does the board actually have discretion to reject it, or is it simply procedural that the Board of Supervisors has to be the one to consolidate it?
It is procedural.
Yeah.
Because we are calling the election, we will hold the election either way. If you pass the resolution calling the election. And so the election's happening if you pass the resolution, and it's administrative for them to agree to put it on the ballot.
Thank you, I appreciate that. The election cost of the 434 to 868, would that have to be raised, or is there a line item? And are we gonna Metro? Are we giving any money? How's that gonna look?
I mean, this would be paid by Metro.
We're gonna give almost $1 million out of our budget that we don't have to fund a campaign that we know is gonna fail.
It's not a campaign, it's election costs.
Oh, okay, whatever. Election costs.
Right, that is the cost that we have to pay to the clerk of elections in order to, contribute for the space on the ballot, in the voter information pamphlet, et cetera.
But that money is gonna come out of our budget.
Okay.
If you think we have a problem of how the public looks at us now, if this fails, I mean, and we put almost $1 million into election costs, it's gonna be even worse. I mean, we don't, will the county need a 2/3? I'm only looking at you because you're the supervisor. If you put yours on, do you need 2/3 or is it a majority?
The county proceeds with a measure via general tax. It only requires 50% plus one.
Okay, thank you. I personally feel this is fiscally irresponsible. I mean, we're gonna be putting almost $1 million of Metro money that we were just told we don't have into a measure that we were told was not in the margin of error. We were just told, we are facing a time where prices have gone up for everybody. I just got an alert that Trump has now said that the ceasefire has been violated again. There's no end to this war. I get it. I mean, we can come from a place of emotion. Of course, we want to see Metro succeed, and we want to, have all the services that we were, giving out. But we have to live in reality as well. And reality is telling us this is not going to pass. we are going to spend a lot of money to end up having to make major cuts at the end. I don't personally, I don't see how that, we're just trying to make ourselves feel better by saying, okay, we're gonna, at least show the public we're trying. We should show the public that we're actually fiscally responsible and make the right decisions when we're, spending the budget here at Metro. That's what we should be doing. We can't be, as a board member, I supported Reimagine Metro because I thought expanding service was the right direction for our community. But I also thought that there was an understanding that there was going to be a realistic long-term plan to sustain that program. Instead, Metro used one-time funding to launch a permanent expansion of service, even though those funds were known to be temporary. It is not fiscally responsible to build ongoing operations on revenue that is guaranteed to expire without first securing a sustainable funding source. That was never done. And so now, just a few years later after that, taxpayers are being asked to approve a permanent half-cent sales tax to maintain the very service that was expanded off of temporary funding. If Reimagine Metro has been as successful as the agency claims, Metro should clearly explain why it is facing a significant fiscal shortfall, why it expanded service without first securing permanent funding, and why taxpayers are now being asked to solve the financial challenges that resulted from those directions. At a time that I've been speaking already, families are struggling with rising costs of housing, groceries, utilities, healthcare, childcare, and every other day expenses. Another half-cent sales tax would place an even greater burden on lower and middle class income households. Although Santa Cruz County's median household income is well above the national average, that statistic masks the reality that ours is also one of the most expensive places to live in this country. High incomes do not necessarily mean families have disposable income. In South County, where household incomes are substantially lower than the rest of this county, we are facing families that are struggling with the rising costs of housing, groceries, healthcare, and childcare. Watsonville families would pay the same increased sales tax as everyone else, despite facing the very different economic realities. For many people in my community, a half-cent sales tax is not insignificant. Every dollar matters, and many families are already making those difficult decisions between paying for medical care, keeping their lights on, or putting the food on the table. Public transport is important. We all know that. And I want to see Metro succeed. But success also requires sound financial planning and accountability. Before approving a permanent tax increase, voters deserve greater transparency about Metro's finances, a clear explanation of how the agency arrived at its current financial situation, measurable performance benchmarks, and assurance that existing sources are being managed as effectively as possible. Accountability should come before asking taxpayers to pay more. Therefore, I will not be supporting placing such a tax in front of our community. I wish my other representative that was elected in Watsonville could be speaking upon this. If she has the opportunity, I'm sure she will. But we are being a voice we are the elected people from that part of the county. There are 3 appointed people on here who do not have the same accountability to the voters that we do as electeds. So when you make this vote, it may make us personally feel good about ourselves, but you are placing a burden on lower and middle income households. Thank you.
Director Dutra. I'll share some thoughts before we go to public comment. And it starts with when driving a bus, you need a steady hand on the wheel, and quickly jerking the wheel in one direction or another doesn't typically end well. And I'm concerned that if we proceed with an election in 2026 and putting this on the ballot, that choice is decidedly not free. There's the costs that were listed here between $434,000 and $868,000. Then on top of that, there'd be any costs if this agency decides to do some education in the public. That could easily be another $500,000. And then there's also the private costs. If I'm actually going to prosecute this campaign, for a countywide campaign, you probably need at least $150,000 that a private group would have to raise, really just to do a basic amount of messaging. Yard signs, a mailer, maybe one, maybe two, and some walk pieces, etc. I'm also concerned about the costs that in sort of messaging and what this indicates. I mean, what would we want Friends of Metro to do with this? Should the signature drive be immediately terminated and any funds remaining go towards, paying for those yard signs this fall? There's limited resources on the private side, to support this as well. I mean, I still think while ACA 22 is a huge threat and definitely it reduces the likelihood that a citizen's measure will still be viable in 2028, or at least provide the same advantage, I think it's still the best chance. And ACA 22 could fail. I mean, we don't know. We don't know where the interest groups are going to come out who, will support or oppose that. And if it fails and a citizen measure succeeds in placing it on the ballot in 2028, that is the best chance this agency has of securing a new revenue source. And so I'm concerned that we will undercut that pathway with a measure on this fall's ballot. There's also concerns about messaging in that. I mean, if we proceed with this, the Board of Supervisors we have a meeting called for August 4th to discuss the county's own revenue measure to support health services primarily, including potentially support for our hospitals, which are under tremendous stress right now, and other elements of the safety net, including food and healthcare. And if we're talking now between these two measures about a full percentage increase for the taxpayers of Santa Cruz County, that means we're looking at an average sales tax in the county of 10.75%. The only chance that I think the combined measures would have of passing is working together. Even then, I think maybe the county's measure would be successful, but ours would most likely still not be. Trying to just put a measure out there and hoping it succeeds has been demonstrated within our own electoral history to not be a path to victory. I mean, the city of Santa Cruz put Measure F on the ballot in 2022, a sales tax, thinking, hey, we are actually probably the most, in general, pro-service, pro-tax electorate within the county. They didn't do anything to prosecute a campaign to champion it, and it failed. And then they actually put together an effort 2 years later. That was Measure L that was successful, and it passed by 61.78%. At the same time, the county sort of collaborated in that messaging. We passed Measure K, which got 54% countywide. And so right there, you should think about the difference between the city's amount of approval, 61.78%, and the county's 54%. This has to be a county-wide measure. And in general, the countywide electorate is less favorable to sales taxes than either the city of Santa Cruz or the city of Watsonville. And it's an incredibly short timeline for any private entity to raise funds to support this effort. So, for those reasons, I'm not inclined to support moving forward with the measure in 2026. I think also that if we do, as Mr. Boygan said, and we want to put out there the messaging that this is a time of urgency, then we probably should proceed in 2027 with some cuts, more serious than we are currently considering, to really demonstrate that, okay, we can't afford to continue spending down reserves, and we're going to make cuts starting in fiscal year 28 or June 27. That's where I'm at right now.
I just want to kind of comment what you just said as well. It is very difficult countywide to pass such a measure. Those of us that have been around for a while, we know that. I think Measure D was probably the last one, and that's because everybody's hands were involved in it. And so we just had Brian Peoples earlier say there would be at least one major organization who is quite influential not be a part of it. That would put it at risk right there. Let's say if, my colleague and I from Watsonville decide not to participate, that's a huge portion of people not participating as well. That last one, you need everybody involved. Otherwise, there's not a historical campaign that has passed in recent history without that support. So that's something else to keep into consideration, as you said, and how hard it is. It's countywide. It's not the city of Santa Cruz. I mean, I try to be all right. We're different than Santa Cruz. We're different than Scotts Valley. The cities are different. We vote differently. I don't know when the last time Scotts Valley passed a 2/3 sales tax measure, or the city of Capitola. We passed Measure Y in 2020. That passed by 76% in Watsonville. And that's because it was around police, public safety. That affected every single person. Not everybody feels affected by Metro, even though we want to be able to provide for people who, may not have vehicles, or you need to get around the county. We want to provide this bus service, but it doesn't affect everybody. And, I think that the topic really has to affect everybody. And you're going to be putting them up against a healthcare measure where some people may feel like, you know what, if this is going to save Watsonville Hospital or a bus system, I'm going to tell you right now, they're going to choose the hospital over the bus system. And that's just it. And we were given by Jared and the attorney online today, not the greatest news. I mean, there is a compromise happening right now at the Capitol, because I'm sure they've done internal polling knowing that measure, if it goes to the ballot, is going to pass. So I think that we need to be pragmatic as a board. We need to be smart, and it's unfortunate the situation we're in. We used one-time funding for something that we did not create a sustainable path forward. I think we cut our losses, and we may have to make tough decisions, like our chair just said about, making the decisions more now than waiting to do it later. And I never got my answer from Chuck because he was gone, but I think he's back. But going into next year's budget, would we be using reserves at that point to balance the budget?
Yeah, the hearings.
Okay, thank you. So that means we're gonna be going into our reserves to balance the budget. So that's kind of right.
Yeah, I just want to say, I wasn't here when the board voted to move forward with Reimagine Metro. I think at the time we knew that we needed to prove to our community that we can do what they asked us to do: increase service, increase frequency. And I am concerned about cuts to our service that may jeopardize our community and transit housing. And for me, it's important that we continue the level of service, because like our CEO has said, cutting it now will impact our community in a way that, may not give us the support that we need to pass a tax measure. And our community has responded very favorable to Reimagine Metro. I mean, bus ridership has increased by 70%. We're going to be 10% above pre-COVID levels. 5.5 million boardings a year, 55,000 trips on Cruz. 62% of our community members who ride the bus do not have access to any vehicle, because we are their mobility lifeline. I think, yes, we have to be smart and pragmatic and be responsible with our money. And yes, it may cost $1 million to put this on the ballot, to levy $27 million that we can potentially get. And I understand that we have a tight timeline. I don't know who will be doing the work, right? Friends of Santa Cruz Metro is already doing a lot of the campaign. I do not want that to stop. I think I see this as two different paths forward. And I just don't want to close this auction because we have such a tight timeline. We're not making a decision today, but I would like to move forward with this special meeting to have a deeper discussion. Perhaps our other board members can participate and really think about whether we want to move forward. But if we don't vote on this today, that option will close.
Thank you. Why don't we open it to the public? Who wants to comment on this item?
Eduardo Montesino, as an advocate for many, many years of Santa Cruz Metro, in different capacities, I'm torn. Very torn, because the news of today, I don't see us ready to do a campaign in November. I just don't see it, in a really strict timeline. If we would have had a plan before, yeah, I would be more supportive. But it's a really hard task. The countywide, measure is a difficult one. The county has it down. The county just did it, a couple years ago. They go out to the community. They go out. They just have a game plan. They just have to execute it. We currently do not. And even with all that campaign of gathering signatures, there's a campaign gathering signature. Now there's a difference of campaign of, actually going out to voters for this. So like I said, I'm torn. It's a difficult situation, but like I said, bigger discussion needs to be had to, the language and see what the potential is for private, donors. Because if there's no bites, then that's even more difficult situation. But for today's discussion, probably move forward to have those discussions, and then in July, once we gather more information, you guys make a better sound decision. But like I said, not looking very well. But like I said, let's gather information.
Thank you.
Hello. Ben Finken. I am a bus operator and member of SMART, but I'm speaking as a member of the public. These are my own comments and opinion. And I'll start with learning of the new changes to ACA 22. I know that there was already a large coalition of unions and local organizations that were against it because of especially the retroactive damage it would do. I imagine that still going forward, it would face the same opposition because of the future potential, like we're seeing here, funding problems it could bring. And that Howard Jarvis measure qualified because they are an established big money organization. Friends of Santa Cruz Metro is brand new, all volunteers. Most of us have never done this before, and we're trying our hardest. And every time we go out to collect signatures, there is so much support. And it's not because people are against it, it's because it's hard to run a campaign like this. And increasing cost of living is hard, but the majority, like probably 95% of people who ride the bus are low income, and they're riding the bus because they don't have other options. And yes, it would be a sales tax, and that is, money out of people's pockets, but it's a sales tax. It's going to scale with what you spend. And so if you don't have money, you're not spending as much on non-essentials, it's not going to affect you as much. And to lose bus service, I think would be a greater impact on people who are disadvantaged and need transit service. So in 2024, there was a lot of, across the country, upset with Democratic status quo. They felt that it always happens. It's the regular political cycle. They feel that they're not doing enough, and there was a lot of frustration, and so a lot of Democratic progressive supported type initiatives and services, opinion's going to go down. And in 26, what we're looking at is people who are very upset with current federal leadership, And across the country, there are people who have lost services because of federal cuts. And they have seen the damage that that can do. And yeah, maybe they're saving some tax money, but now they're losing access to so many things that, so many programs that affect their lives positively. I personally think that leaving the language until ended by voters instead of having a sunset, it emphasizes that the voters have a choice. And that is a question I had, is if we put in sunset language, it could still be recalled, as far as I understand. And so it doesn't seem to make sense to me to put the sunset, because either way it could be recalled and it emphasizes the voter's choice. And we're still gathering signatures. We're still gonna push for March 2028. And like Director Orbach said, like, this is another avenue. I think if the board does this now and it doesn't pass, it will get visibility. And people will see what's going on with Metro and we'll talk about it. And when I've talked to people who are initially in an opposition or critical of Metro's financial position and management, and I give them information about the realities of running a transit agency, they're like, whoa, I didn't know any of that. Why isn't that out there? And I think that if we run a campaign being transparent and having information, it will swing a lot of people. And as far as well, running that type of campaign, Friends of Metro is all volunteers. We have one campaign staffer who's part-time. And I personally am willing to continue giving my time to support Metro and support our communities and support the people that need public transit. And, you know, this would really severely impact the people who need, the people who are most disadvantaged. And like, personally, I am happy to pay a little bit more tax so that, you know, grandma has the bus. Thank you.
Comment here in the room? Anyone online?
Yes, there is.
I think there was a motion on the table. I would like to second that.
Right,
motion.
we're checking for online comment,
Right.
public comment. We'll come back to.
Okay.
Go ahead, Jaime.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Good morning. Is it morning over there? My apologies. I'm in St. Paul, Minnesota right now, and I was having a tough time getting on the meeting. We've already had these discussions before. We've already mentioned how crucial and essential it is to have service for our public. We already began the plan of working on getting signatures. We're close to the deadline. Being close to the deadline, we're already at a past point where our drivers, our signature gatherers are losing morale. You're about to make this worse if you go through this plan of making cuts next year. I mean, we're trying to survive here. Everybody's putting in their 2 cents. So we have drivers invested in this, other people invested in you, and with all due respect, you're about to make a decision that's going to be crucial. I strongly emphasize, I strongly request that you guys reconsider that instead of doing layoffs next year, 2027. Now, I don't mean to tell you how to do your job, but you guys are board directors. You're here for everybody, specifically for the public. And that's what we're trying to pull. That's what we're trying to support. We're trying to, you know, get people from one place to another. Let's make the right decision. And I'm sorry I wasn't following the meeting because I was having a tough time hearing it or getting in connection with it. But I know there's at least one board director in there that put in his 2 cents. I will remind that board director as well, he works for his public. And when this doesn't happen, his public is going to be made aware of the decisions he's making that's going to affect them and everybody else. I apologize for my attitude. I apologize for my tone of voice. I'm jet lagged as it is, and I'm already pissed off. So please, I strongly advise, I strongly ask that you reconsider laying people off next year. You're already losing the morale of the people. You're about to lose more of it, and it's going to really put us in a deeper hole. Thank you.
Thank you. For clarification, we're discussing putting a measure on the November 2026 ballot.
Yeah, he
And
doesn't
that
know
would
what
be
he's
a great
talking
thing.
about. No, I'm sorry. If you're gonna address, I'm the one he's referring to. At least know what you're talking about. We're talking about a measure to go on the ballot.
Any other public comment?
That's great. That's great. And we are
Okay,
talking about,
Thank you,
no,
Jaime. Thank you.
we'll talk later, Jimmy, not a problem.
Is there any other public comment online? All right, I'll return it to the board for action. I believe that someone wanted to make a motion, Director Downing.
Huh?
You're moving staff recommendation.
Yes. And I'll second it.
Okay. Motion by Director Downing, seconded by Vice Chair Orbach to approve.
Reducing American troops, imposing a 1.5% retail taxation and use tax for public transit. They're calling a public hearing to adopt the ordinance.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Director Dutra.
Thank you. I have no problem making I've been speaking publicly, so my comments are public. I did a poll in one day, almost had 100 comments on it. I know where the public is standing in my community. Very progressive people have commented on how they don't want it. Conservative people in the middle of the road. So this isn't just a one-sided thing. This is people of all levels commenting on this, how they do not want to have an additional tax on them. So, I understand that this is going to affect, our organization. But we were put in this position by using one-time funding. I don't know why all of a sudden placing all of the, because something is failing to place it on one person. This was a decision made a few years back. It was poorly made. And now we have to make decisions that may be unpopular. But at the end of the day, it's the health of this organization that's important. And all I have to say is if we do move forward to July, which it seems like it probably will be, I hope that the board or whoever will step forward and say, we have found where we're going to raise the money for this campaign. Because if we are not able to step forward, like Eduardo just said, showing where the money's going to come from, then you got to explain to the voters when you're up for reelection why you were fiscally irresponsible, knowing spending $1 million of Metro money that we don't have on a measure that is gonna fail. Thank you.
Further comment, Director Downing.
Yeah, you brought up a really good point about this one-time purchase, a one-time grant. Back in 2024, we had one bullet point on this, but back in 2024, we were considering this ballot measure to address that very project and the funding that was running out. And we were extremely encouraged by the city of Santa Cruz to wait. And so we did. And that's come back, and we probably shouldn't have. Probably should have gone ahead. So it sucks, but we're kind of trying to catch up to that. And so that's been in my mind ever since then. And I think that that's just part of my reason for making this decision. So I keep having that in the back of my. It doesn't help, but
Yeah.
I just want to.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Any other comment? I'll just say I'm not going to support the motion because I do feel that we should consolidate our efforts into one election, which our best chance to be in 2028. I fully support a new revenue measure for this agency at some point, and I fully believe in the work that we've done through Reimagine Metro, and really the public does as well, given the huge increase in ridership and the favorability ratings of this agency in the public. So my no vote is in no means a reflection on my opinion of this agency, which I have the highest regard. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No.
No.
Any abstentions? That passes with Directors Dutra and Koenig voting no. All right, we'll now proceed.
Excuse me, Chair. We do have one of our longevity awards here for Jose. If we could present that real quick. Sure.
Good opportunity.
Tiny.
All right. Fernandez? Yes, please. We are very pleased to present you with the certificate of appreciation for 25 years of service.
How can I follow this?
Finally, the picture, give you a few more moments to think about what you're saying.
Thank you. I don't have much to say. Thank you, the Metro, but I just want to thank people back from the days when I got hired, Brian Bears and Judy Sosa, Bonnie Moore, and Barnum, seeing them break ball with her help and, you know, making this possible. So thank you guys. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, we will now proceed with item 13, a public hearing to commence at 9 AM or as soon thereafter as the matter is given. Which happens to be 10:56 AM. On the status of job vacancies, recruitment and retention efforts at Santa Cruz Metro pursuant to Assembly Bill 2561. And presenting on this item will be Don Permet, our Chief Human Resources Officer.
Hello, good morning. So if you remember last month, I spoke about AB 2561, which mandates public agencies in California to assess and report on staffing vacancies to enhance transparency and address workforce challenges. And I said that this month I would give a presentation on the vacancy numbers. So I'm proud to say that we are under the threshold, so we're doing well there. The threshold is anything over the 20%, and our highest is 5%. So we have a 5% vacancy in our fixed route, 4% in our paracrews, 5% in our SCIU, and unrepresented management is 4%. The recruiting efforts that we do have special situations where if it's a position hard to find, such as mechanics and for a while bus operators, we were offering a hire on and referral bonus program for those positions because they are just harder to find. So it helped us bring in a lot of mechanics and a lot of bus operators doing that program. But that we are under the 20%. And so that was my presentation. Do you have any questions on our vacancies for recruiting efforts?
Questions from directors?
Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments from members of the public? Anyone online? All right. Then we'll move to item 13B, which is final adoption of Santa Cruz Metro's fiscal year 27 and 28 budget. Presentation by our Chief Financial Officer, Chuck Farman.
All right, I'm back again. Hopefully the last. But yeah, this basically gonna go close the comment period. So at this point right now, we're gonna adopt this budget for agency to move forward as of July 1st. So, I'm gonna go through this fairly quick. We've been through this in March, and then we did it again in April, we did it again in May, so now we're in June. So at this point right now, I think most everybody here is familiar with the numbers. So like I said, again, I'm just gonna go through here quickly. Stop me if you wanna back up on anything. So currently right now, we're looking at presenting a FY 27 final budget of approximately $4.2 million loss, and I'll go through some of the changes that we made. That is pretty much flat with what we did in our budget for FY 26. This is on the operating side. From 26 to 27, as noted, we went from 4 million to 4.2 million. We made a lot of ins and outs that go throughout. The biggest piece right there is the fact that we get the credit back for the bridge loan interest that we're not going to pull on, but it's going to be offset by the fact that we are going to hydrogen buses and the fuel costs are far more expensive than CNG. from what we changed from the last board meeting in May to now, we've made a couple changes. So we've made about $233,000 reductions in non-personnel costs, and I'll show you that in a second. And then at the same point too, on the TERSA grant SB 125, that's not SB 125, this is another grant that we received. It's for 4 years, about $200,000 a year. So that's went up about 204. So we got about $400,000 favorable from the last submission on May till now. There we go. All right. So in March, we presented a loss of about 7.1 million. From there, we went back, we did a lot of changing. This is where we closed the positions, made a lot of freezing of travel and training and so forth here. That got us to about 4.6 since then. And so this is from May till now. We've reduced some of the marketing pieces. We got a little bit of favorability on a payment for software, about 20. And then this is basically additional TERSA funding, about 204 that we got favorable. So it's about $400,000 favorable from last time. That gets us to the 4.2. Are the marketing revisions, the change that was made was apparent that we were not going to be going to the ballot in November 26th and instead in March 28th? That's most of it, yes. So then if the board decides in July to go forward, 26, we would need to restore that as well as the cost the agency would have to pay to the county. Well, the 400 to 800 is not in there. It was never in. Right. But the marketing costs, yes. I mean, if we go to what they talked about was the advertising. The budget that's before the board now takes that out. You got it. That's exactly it. So if the board makes the decision in July to go forward, we revise the budget. Revise the budget for August and add the 40.
So we can reprioritize which campaigns we focus on for the year, for the short term. There's a lot of, campaigns that we do right now just with community support. There's, tactics coming out. So we can kind of revise the spending there. There is some money there still for printing and costs. And so we could strategize, how to use that existing funds.
Not for a campaign, that's for information.
Information.
I have a question on that to follow up. So the 437,000 would be plus the 800 and possible 50,000. So that we would put into the budget.
Yeah, so the 437 is a savings right now that we go from May to June. If we were to put in the ballot cost in there, then that would actually make the 4.2 worse.
Right, what would it be?
Sorry?
What would it be?
So you go back to either 4.6 or 5 million.
Okay.
If we don't change anything else other than just put that. Right now, we're losing 4.2. And that would just be an additional, because we've been spending the money.
So the savings that you have right there, that would go back into it, correct?
The
437 or whatever.
So the 437 is a savings, that's
Right.
correct. And now we're at 4.2. If you want to turn around and put more money back in that we're going to spend, then that would actually make our loss worse.
So I understand all that, but I'm trying to understand like what that 437, would that be in addition to what we were told earlier, how much it would cost to put it on the ballot?
Yeah, the 437 is completely different than what.
Completely different.
Completely
So
different.
we're actually gonna be putting about probably 1.2 million back into it.
So you put in the ballot cost, whatever that is.
Let's say
And then any marketing costs associated with.
400.
Well, it's not 400, about 200.
200.
So 200.
So about $1 million.
Could be, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Good on this. And then visually, you can see when we go from 26 to 27, the biggest driver between year over year is really our fuel costs. I mean, we're going from CNG at about 30 a kilogram to $11.25 a kilogram. Now it's better efficiency on the hydrogen buses, but it is a cost factor and we knew about it. So this is the biggest thing. And then as for, what I'm gonna do as I go through here, if nothing has changed on these slides since what I presented in the month of May, I'll just say nothing has changed. And if you have any questions, go ahead and bring it up. At this point right now, nothing really has changed here other than, the numbers that I've shown you right now. I mean, we have not changed these numbers. For the funding source, these are the FTEs. So right now we're talking about the 386 and a half. That number has not changed since the month of May. So we have not made changes to it. And these are the positions. And then on to 28. So FY 28, this is where the big jump. So right now we're looking at about $16 million, from 4.26 to $16 million, budget over budget. Here's the changes. Big changes in here is the fact that, of course, salaries and benefits and so forth go up. So that's one big piece of it. Our fuel costs are going to go up since contractually we're going to spend more time on the hydrogen buses. And then at the same point, the biggest piece is really down below where it says TIRSA SB 125. We're exhausting that in 28. So ultimately, we're talking about $7.4 million added that change. So that's the biggest piece. And I think we've already talked about this. And then what we've done since the May work meeting is what we've gone in and we basically now saved about 867,000 from changes. So 650 from non-personnel plus an SB 125. That's that 200,000 I talked about that we just found 4 years, about 200,000. So that comes back. And from there, when you kind of look at the bridge, we started at 17.5. We got us down to about $16.8 million in the month of May. And then since then, we've added another $867,000 savings. So now they're down to about 15 million. And this is, like I said, this is critical. After this point, this is where we do need another revenue stream to absorb this amount. The risk have not changed. And then operating cash balance. There we go. Okay, so I'm gonna kind of really high level give you this. This is our operating budget or cash reserves. This was as of 6/18. These are buckets at a point in time. So this number will be different at the very end of the month, and it'll be very different at the middle of July. It really depends on when we spend money at the door and when we get the cash in. So right now at this point, we have a cash operating balance in our bank account of about $49.8 million. Last year, at the end of, I'd say July 1st, we had 66.6. So now we're at 49.8. Down below on the buckets, as you notice, operating capital reserve fund is 0 and COVID is 0. That's okay because we know we have the puts and takes. The biggest piece here is the fact that we do have money that's outstanding. It's just, think of this as kind of like the float time. This is where we submit and we have to wait for the money to come in from the grants. So we have like $30 million worth of grant stuff coming in. Primarily, all of that is really the VW grant. So when we start flowing these buses and we start getting our money for the VW grant, then we should have the money coming back in. But this is what we've always projected. This is why I asked for that short-term loan, because we knew we'd have this valley because we'd have to absorb that amount and then it'll come back. It's just, to me, the valley is not as low as what we expected, which is good. And we didn't have to draw on them. So this is where we stand. I feel comfortable here. I think this is good. On the capital, nothing has changed on the capital. This is exactly the same that was presented in the month of May. If anybody has any questions on this. And then same with the funding. Funding hasn't changed at all either as well. Bulk of that is the TIRSA, because of that is the bus and the hydrogen tanks and so, as you can see, going across the street. And that's it. No, like quick.
Any questions or comments from the board? No, it's not for knowledge or lack of interest, but we've seen this a few times now. Right, any comments from members of the public?
Just one, it's, in the board packet that I printed, it says a placeholder. For the public, it should be the whole budget. It should not, but this is what I printed and that's just what's on there. It should be the whole budget, just.
She asked when you should
print it.
She's asked 2 days ago.
Updated.
Thank you. Any other comments here in the room? But we'll come back to the board. Any other public comments? Any comments online?
Or no.
All right, I'll turn to the board for action and discussion.
Just a quick comment. So,
I'm
so we're good for this year. How would this budget going in next year on that with the buckets? How would that look by the end of next year without a ballot passage?
I can't tell you specifically here because there's always these puts and takes, but if you look at the presentation that I did back in, I think it was April, they talked about the cliff.
Yeah, I remember the cliff.
Yeah, so look at that cliff and I'll show you.
So, but the basic.
But it's approximately in that range. Like I said, we just never know exactly when something's gonna go out the door versus cash coming in. So that's an approximate amount if everything works perfect.
But the reality is those buckets will be depleted.
Yes, the money will start coming down, and by the time we get to 28, the end of 28, so this is 3 months post the March board thing. You'll see that we do still have cash above those top 4 buckets. But down below, you're gonna have very little cash left because we're gonna use it all to kind of help absorb ourselves to get past that.
So the reserves will not be fully funded.
The bottom buckets, you can say for the most part, the bottom buckets are pretty much almost all gone except for just.
They look almost gone right now.
I'm sorry?
They almost looked almost gone right now.
That's because what you're seeing is the fact of.
The grants are not in there. I get that, yeah. But I guess my question is, the ones that said fully funded, will we have to go into those, start depleting?
At the very top.
Yeah.
You're talking about the very top.
Yes, when will we be going into those to start?
If everything goes as business as usual, probably fall of 2028.
Okay, great, thank you.
One of these two. One of the unknowns is fuel prices, right? So I mean, it certainly went up further than we expected, a while back. So I'm assuming, one of the unknowns is where are they gonna be in the next few months with hydrogen buses and things too? I don't know how much fuel is
Contracted with the hydrogen, so.
Okay.
We're fixed on the price of
Good,
that,
that's
which is actually good.
For 3 years, we're.
All right, good. That's,
Price.
Yeah,
so that's what I wondered. Okay, if we're seeing that, it's their volatility and that.
yeah, that's good on that side.
We're set on
Yeah,
that.
but on the diesel side or CNG, it could
That-
fluctuate.
That's what I'm, diesel's not crazy, but more, now we're pretty much phasing out the diesel to where most of it'll be hydrogen. Correct. So less impact on the
On
diesel.
fluctuations, yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's good to know.
Is there a motion?
I move approval.
I've seen it. Moved by Director Lind and seconded by Director Pagler to approve the 26-27 budget. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That passes unanimously by those present. Thank you. And now to item 14, which is the evaluation of service reduction scenarios. Ergo.
Right. I have slides, right? Yes, good. So at the last board meeting, you had asked us to look at additional service reduction scenarios for bringing forth this morning. And what we took as a starting point was essentially working to balance the deficit in FY 27, that $4.2 million that Chuck just presented. I'll pause there for a second because none of these service reductions would potentially be enacted in FY 27. There's a whole process that we would go out to the public, we would do initial planning, we would do Title VI analysis, come back for board approval. But we just wanted to take a starting point. And for that, we looked at balancing the FY 27 budget. So that 4.2 million is about a 20% service reduction. If you'll remember back in April, we presented 40% service reduction plan, and that's what would need to be enacted if we don't secure additional sources of revenue to support Reimagine Metro. The 20% would potentially be an interim step if the board chooses to go in that direction. So we looked at 3 scenarios. At the last board meeting, we talked a lot about productivity and efficiency. And so one scenario just looks at eliminating all of our low productivity routes. Second scenario looks at reducing frequency. So this essentially would be walking back all of the improvements in frequency that were enacted through Reimagine Metro. And then the third scenario is kind of a hybrid between the two. I presented this last time. We can basically look at our routes in 3 separate categories. So on the lower right corner is high ridership, low cost routes, routes 18 to 19. These are routes that are not only very high ridership, but we also receive revenue through our contract with UCSC. And so they have very low costs as well. In the middle, we have high ridership, high cost. Routes 1 and 2 between Watsonville and Santa Cruz. This is where we've invested a lot of resources through Reimagine Metro in boosting frequency. That's why they're high cost. They operate 7 days a week at relatively high frequencies, 20 minutes throughout the day. And we've seen substantial ridership gains. But we have to spend resources to achieve those gains. And then the lower left, low ridership, low cost, rural routes. A lot of our local Watsonville routes fall into this category. And essentially, we'd have to cut a lot of these services to achieve any meaningful budget actions or impacts. Looking at it one slightly different way, because the first scenario looks at this efficiency metric, which is the cost per boarding, is how much are we spending on average per passenger trip. And so in the next slide, when I present that, it's basically that lower circle on the right, which is all the routes that have relatively high cost per boarding, are a small percentage of operating costs. And so we have to cut a lot of them. And you'll see that in the next slide to make a substantial impact. And in the middle, again, the 1 and 2, 35. These are routes that we invest a lot of resources in. They have, middle cost. And so in that scenario, we're basically looking at reducing frequency to reduce the cost. So scenario 1, cut low productivity routes. So we can achieve that 4.2 million in savings which is again, a 20% reduction in service by cutting the routes on this list entirely. They don't operate anymore. Route 4, local route here in Santa Cruz, Route 40 and 41 are our North Coast routes in Bonnie Doon, Davenport, 55, La Selva, and Rio Del Mar. And then 73, 78, 79 are local Watsonville routes. These are our highest cost per boarding routes. And if we're looking at efficiencies, one potential scenario is to just cut them entirely. Like we're going to focus on our routes where we have higher ridership. And so this is what that looks like. This is the current map in Santa Cruz. I'll just cycle through that. And if you focus on the orange routes, they disappear entirely. So 40, 41 to the north, 55, they go away. And everything else stays the same. And local Watsonville, again, focus on the orange routes, and the 79 is the blue one at the bottom of the screen, 73 Travel Freedom Boulevard. Those, some of them disappear entirely and others reduce frequency. Cycle through that again. So we lose a lot of coverage, right? It affects about 300,000 boardings a year, so a little under 10% of our total ridership. But a lot, probably some of the most vulnerable people in our system are looking for that service. Scenario 2 looks at reducing frequency with the rationale that we want to maintain coverage. And so we'll do that throughout the system. And these routes where we currently run high frequency service, 15 to 20 minutes or better throughout the day, we would cut those all back to 30 minutes a day. That also achieved a 20% reduction, the 4.2 million. This impacts substantially more ridership, 1.4 million passenger trips a year, about 25% of our current ridership would be lost through this scenario. Essentially rolls back all of the gains that we've put in through Reimagine Metro. Because that's where we invested. The majority of that effort was into boosting frequency on the idea that, and not just the idea, what people were telling us when we went into that planning was that the bus came more often and paid more. And that played out over the last 3 years substantially. So what that looks like is focus on the red. We don't have any red being the high frequency routes. All that disappears in this scenario. Yeah, that's it. All that disappears. And then finally, we looked at a hybrid between the two, which is what we called reducing higher cost routes. And this is a mix of both higher cost in terms of that high cost per boarding, the rural routes and Watsonville routes, but also reducing some frequency from scenario 2. And so in this scenario, we reduce weekend frequency on routes 1 and 2 down to 30 minutes. It's currently at 20 minutes throughout the day. We reduce Route 35 to hourly on weekends. It's currently 30 minutes. We reduce Highway 17 to hourly on weekends. It's currently 30 minutes. 73 goes to every 2 hours, and the 79 goes down to once per hour. And weekday frequency is where we see substantial reductions basically carried over from that scenario 1, but the routes aren't eliminated entirely. And we go basically to a handful of trips on routes 40, 41, and 55. And then the 73, 79, 17 see substantial reduces in frequency, but are not eliminated entirely. So this scenario, slightly higher than scenario 1, 400,000 boardings impacted, or about 8% of our system total right now. That's ridership that we think would be lost. But again, it gets that 4.2 million. This one is much harder to see on the map because there's lots of little changes. So yeah, I could walk anybody through it in more detail later if they'd like to, but it's probably not worth going through it like this. Some things disappear, some things change color as we go through it. So in summary, if our baseline today is around 5.6 million, that's where we're projected now to end this month, this fiscal year. That first scenario of eliminating the low productivity routes gets us to 5.2 million. The frequency, again, that was substantial drops in ridership, 4.2 million about. And then the higher cost route scenarios similar to low productivity, around 5.2. We would be looking at between a 6 to 8% on the two outside cases and a 20 to 23% ridership frequency case. And then as part of this, we looked at some other cost saving measures related to service, reducing our free fare days. These are 4 times throughout the year where we provide free service to the public system wide. Very minor savings here, $42,000 over the course of the year. And then we could also consider eliminating our community activities, 4th of July support, Santa Cruz County Fair. Again, pretty moderate savings here, $78,000 a year. So yeah, staff is not recommending doing any of this. This is presented for informational purposes to give a sense of what an interim, say 20% service reduction scenario might look like, should we have to ultimately get to 40% if we don't secure additional local funding. Thank you.
Questions or comments from directors? Director Dutra?
Do we receive a lot of this funding off of applications using Watsonville as a disadvantaged community?
For operations, no. We do benefit potentially in some grant applications for our capital programs that we where we're proposing improvements in the disadvantaged community census tract in Watsonville, but operational dollars.
Did we not use Watsonville and SB 125, the $16 million grant, to try in order to prevent service cuts and support Reimagine Metro operations?
SB 125, yeah, we was used entirely to prevent service cuts, support Metro operations.
So if something like that was successful, and then cutting all the services out of the community you used to get that funding,
But we didn't use the Watsonville community to get that funding. That SB 125 is supporting service throughout the district. But it does support service in disadvantaged communities.
What was it used all in that application?
Used, I mean, discussed, sure, yeah. I mean, we discussed our services throughout the county, and the benefit that Metro provides to the county.
But I mean, so it would be, from what I'm understanding, with the cuts, I know we're probably not doing anything, but as we move forward, because this discussion probably will continue to take shape and form. Will any of these grants be jeopardized in the future or currently if we start cutting routes in a disadvantaged community?
Not tied specifically to disadvantaged communities. There are certain grants that we have gotten funding for where we've said we're gonna increase funding at Route 1, say, for example. That was our Cycle 6 TIRSIP grant. So we would increase funding on routes 1 to 17 and bring back the 90X. And so that's one example where we would be forced, if you will, to maintain service on those fundings to meet the grant, those routes to meet the grant obligations.
Okay, great. So it's specific routes. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
In your first scenario, where we actually use 73, that's a lot. You know, one thing that I think about is I joined the board right as Reimagine Metro, basically. And this ridership that has grown. A lot of these folks have no idea what Reimagine Metro is and don't care. Them, it's just the service that they have. So we have to keep that in mind when we make some decisions, whichever scenario, if we ever have to go to them. I do worry about, especially the folks out on the 40. So, because all of these boards tie to these transit centers where these people can then go on from there to other places. So, I appreciate you doing the hybrid model as the third, because it is a bit, I mean, you do lose a lot if you go with the second one with the frequency, which is the very thing that people are now excited about and or just expect. But I do appreciate that hybrid when I worry about those folks that, you know, live out there and rely on transit.
Yeah, we work to build a network, and that's exactly what you're saying over the past 3 years. So yeah, I don't think people are thinking necessarily about individual routes. It's across the system. The same thing applies to the weekend service. So we increase weekend service quite a bit for Reimagine Metro, and yeah, it's lower ridership. It's less productive on the weekends, but if you're a person that's trying to live car free or car light, that 7-day-a-week service is necessary for you to be able to do that. So even though ridership is less on the weekends, cutting it would impact weekday ridership as well.
Well, if we have 30% plus of the residents in the county, things really impacted, especially those that have more recently said, okay, I'm just gonna because it's here. Suddenly it's not there and that hardship returns.
And adding to that, with all the housing that we are having to build in the county that's not including parking, when some have no parking, and the ones in our area
Recording in
a
progress.
shift necessary if there is no flex for the cars.
Yeah, the frequency that we implemented on routes 1, 2, 18, and 19 meets the state's threshold for a major transit stop where they overlap. And so we created through that service 15,000 parcels that are within that definition of a major transit stop, within a half-mile major transit stop. And that has significant affordable housing development benefits throughout the county that would be lost. And some developments were predicated on that transit being there.
Yes, I mean, I've seen it. And that's gonna take a while for us to feel that impact, because they're still being constructed. But I know we're all throughout the county looking at what are we gonna do, and seeing in San Jose, recent stories that some of these projects are going bankrupt because no one's moving in because so there's a lot of unknowns coming up.
Would this third scenario jeopardize any of those projects?
No, because we maintain the weekday frequency on the 1, 2, 18, 19. And that third scenario, we reduce the weekend frequency, but the major transit stop definition is predicated on weekday.
Yeah, I don't like any of these options. I hope that you don't have to make any of these decisions, but of all of them, I appreciate the one where we are not eliminating the routes.
Yeah.
Or we continue the network and the connectivity, even if it means we have to decrease the frequency.
Yeah, I should clarify that the 20% would be a short-term stopgap measure, right? If a future funding measure doesn't pass, we still have to get to the 40 to 50% service cuts that we presented at April. So the 20% maybe gets us 6 to 12 months of a 20% reduction before we have to get to a 40% reduction. And in that scenario, likely that all the frequency goes away because of the amount of cuts that we have to make.
Is so when you talk about a percentage of service, presumably that's based on a revenue service hour. I would have thought that the 20% reduction in service, we would save more than $4.2 million. I mean, is it directly proportional, or is it, are not all, maybe, presumably revenue service hours are all created equal, right?
Yeah, so I don't know, Chuck, you might want to explain this a little better than me, but our total operating cost is based on our fully allocated costs, right? Our bus operator, I mean, everyone in this room, wages, benefits, the cost of this building, right? That's our fully allocated cost. When we cut service, we're cutting on a marginal basis. So we're really just cutting, wages and benefits and some fuel. And so that's why the dollar amount is probably not as high as you think it would be, because it's about half the fully allocated cost. So we cut 20% service, we only save $4 million. That, if I'm explaining, that's the reason that math works out that way, is because we budget on a fully allocated, we can only cut marginally on a marginal cost basis because we still have to, operate the building, all the fixed cost things.
So, I mean,
We have to cut a lot more. Basically, we have to cut a lot more to achieve whatever our target savings is.
right, so you're saying if we cut 40%, we only save 8.4 million still? That we already, is at some point we start
I
reducing.
mean, yeah, that does kind of match the injection in funding we had through SB 125. It was in the range of 8 to 10 million a year to boost that service, and then we're cutting all that.
The one thing too, if you cut 20% or 40%, you also have these like incremental shelving cuts, such as transit supervisors. Once you reduce a certain number of service, operators go away, then transit soup goes away. Mechanics, now you have less buses, so now it impacts the mechanics. So there's some incremental pieces, so the number he's talking about, from 20%, maybe 4 million, 40% is probably gonna get you closer to 10. Because you're gonna have these incremental stuff, but you still are gonna have that infrastructure of the buildings, the equipment, and all that stuff that's here. Yeah. So that kind of helps a little bit. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Open it to the public then, for comment. Anyone here in the room wish to comment on these scenarios?
I hate them all. But I've been there, a few times. The hybrid looks a little bit more promising, but these scenarios, if they were being put in place, when would they be? Like when, to get us, 6 or 8 months, would it be in June? Will it be, and what does that look like versus, what the ranks are now? Because it didn't say anything, versus what the 20% community reduction in floats.
we would, if the board directed us to act today, it would take at least 6 to 9 months to go through the service reduction scenario process. I don't think taking that step, but obviously it's dependent on your direction. I think we'd probably be looking at it 128 if we want to implement an interim step of reducing service, because we know we need to cut a lot by FY 29 if we don't have future funding, local funding security. So FY 28, I think is what we're realistically, even if we started today.
Any other public comment? Right, anyone else is there anyone online? All right. I'll turn to the board for discussion and action. Director Ducha?
Just a quick question. Have there been any conversations working with the unions on, okay, if we have to make cuts, what's ideal for you guys? What's gonna work? What's gonna work for the unions in implementing such a cut? Or are we just, is everyone just holding on to hope, and then if it doesn't go through, it's gonna be a disaster?
I mean, I'll speak from my standpoint, but others can chime in. We have a weekly meeting, monthly meeting with the union related to service, and we relay all the information we talk about here in that meeting. So they're, at least the members of that committee are aware.
Okay.
But the broader, I can't answer, but others maybe can.
Yeah. I mean, we did have, first we had all hands meetings, a couple of weeks ago, where we really laid out to everyone what, the situation is and what, laid out that could be different scenarios, depending on what the board opted to do. Board had to make some decisions. We also had a subcommittee, where we met with, a few of the board members and with the operations with, SMART to go over, looking at service efficiencies, what that, potentially, outside of actual service cuts, what other efficiencies we can potentially do that would, help us with savings as well. So, we are in communication with the unions. So they're aware of where we are at the moment. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions?
Just a question. Is this something that we have to move on today? Do we have to have a vote, or is this something that we're gonna vote on later in the later time?
This is just an informational item. There's no action suggested today. We could take action, but none's required.
And you just need direction? No direction, right?
No directions are required at this time.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions? As was just stated, it's just an informational item, so seeing no motions. Thank you very much for the work. All right, we'll pursue the CEO's oral report.
Right, so Metro operated a special midnight Highway 17 service for the FIFA World Cup matches at Levi's Stadium, or I guess it's San Francisco Stadium. It's not Levi's then. Providing convenient travel between Santa Cruz County and San Jose Deer Dome Station before and after the games. The extended service was offered on June 16th, June 19th, and June 22nd. We received positive feedback from one of our county supervisors who's utilized the service on more than one occasion. Leadership Santa Cruz County celebrated the graduation of Class 39 on June 18th, honoring those who had participated over the past year. From that, Metro had 3 employee graduates: Christina Mielova, our Finance Deputy Director; Monique Yelping, our HR Deputy Director; and Greg Nolan, our Fleet Maintenance Supervisor. Metro, in partnership with SMART, Local 23, will host the second annual Senior Celebration Dinner this Sunday, June 28th, from 1 to 4 p.m. At the Harvey West Clubhouse. Dinner and round-trip transportation will be provided at no cost. Fare cruise service will be available, however, advanced reservations are required. Metro will also participate in the 4th of July parades in Scotts Valley, Aptos, and Watsonville. With the launch of the summer schedule on June 18th, Metro introduced the new route brochures, replacing the former headways to make service information easier to access and understand. The brochures are available at transit centers, on buses, at local libraries, on the Cabrillo College and UCSC campuses and other community locations. Riders who prefer digital tools may continue to access the schedules and real-time information through the Transit app. Metro also launched select late-night Route 1 trips beginning on June 18th, originating near the boardwalk at Clifton Beach, before continuing to Riverfront Transit Center and starting the regular Route 1 trip 15 minutes later. Metro has been honored with the Capio Award of Distinction for Inside Metro, the people behind transit. This recognition reflects the outstanding work of Metro's marketing team, whose creativity, dedication, and commitment to storytelling made this achievement possible. Metro's new fare system, tapped Cruz, is moving steadily toward a late summer launch, with major milestones already locked in. Metro has finished merchant onboarding with all 4 major car brands. Hardware installation on the bus fleets is 90% complete, and the remaining work will wrap up once the last hydrogen buses arrive in July. Buses were cleared at our JKS facility on both sides of the permanent fueler footprint on June 22nd and 23rd to provide access to install the permanent hydrogen fueling tank. Installation of the vaporizers and cascading tanks followed on June 24th. The project team remains on track to commission the fueler by the end of August. The California Transit Training Consortium has agreed to develop 3 specialized courses for Metro staff: the Hydrogen Fundamentals, Fuel Cell Electric Bus Maintenance, and Fuel Cell Electric Bus Operations. These course development efforts are funded through the FY23 Bus and Bus Facilities Grant. Together, these courses will provide Metro mechanics and staff with up-to-date training in hydrogen and fuel cell electric bus technologies, ensuring staff are fully prepared to maintain and operate this emerging transit technology effectively. We're also excited to share that Santa Cruz Metro's redesigned website has been recognized with a Web Excellence Award. The project was centered around one goal: making it easier for riders to find the information they need when they need it. From improved fare and schedule pages to interactive system maps, mobile-friendly navigation, and accessibility-focused design, the new website was built to better support the rider experience. Big congratulations to the Santa Cruz Metro and Selfless teams for their hard work and collaboration on this achievement. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Your comments from directors, Director Lynn?
And I wanted to add Santa Cruz, at the leadership Santa Cruz, I want to note that Metro was actually acknowledged for the support. And, it was nice to hear that recognition and, see many of the staff continue to go through it, and it's proud to hear your recognition.
A fantastic program. I had to go through it last year and I learned a lot about our county, which was really helpful for me and as I look at the county and its needs.
I went through it in 98. Having grown up here, I thought I knew it all. Yeah, they all do. I learned a lot. I mean, even though you think you know, there's so much you learn to the program. I recommend it.
Thank you. Other comments or questions?
I had a question about the hydrogen training.
Mhm.
So this is happening now. What type of training did they get initially?
We just came up with the agreement. In fact, I have to sign the agreement. It's on my desk. So we have the training classes will be created. So we signed the agreement. So.
But I mean, prior to that,
Oh,
before our buses arrived.
So we had Ballard come in and do some training, and we had other New Flyer come in and do some training for our mechanics. So the training has been ongoing since we received the buses. But this is extended training that monies we received from the grant.
Just wondered why we needed that if we've already.
That is the training that we received recently is not enough.
Okay.
This will take us to another level.
And was that based on feedback from the mechanics or just something that you've been observing?
Well, I mean, the training's needed to maintain our vehicles, and we, as I said, we received the grant funding. So I thought this was a great way of advancing our mechanics and our staff.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions on the CEO's report? Any public comment? Being down here in the room, is there any online? All right, thank you very much for the report. We'll now proceed with our last item, item 17. I'm hearing that we do not need to go into closed session on this item and should be able to address it in open session. Subject is approval of formal ratification of a labor agreement extension between the Service Employees International Union Local 521 for the period July 1, 2026 through June 30th, 2027 that contains a 3% contractual wage adjustment. Would you like to say anything about
Yes,
this?
could you finish passing those?
Oh, sorry.
You're right. So
Let's go on here.
since we're skipping, we were gonna talk about that closed session, but now it'll be in front of you, and this is just ratification of the extension of the SIU MOU for just 1 year with a 3% contractual wage adjustment. In front of you are the wage scales. And this authorization is in line with what the board previously authorized, that 3% increase for the year. And that is it. That's all we have to discuss, and turn it back for you to entertain motion.
All right, any questions or comments from directors?
Just here for questions.
I thought you have something more to share.
Nope, just we've concluded negotiations and SEIU did a vote, and so they voted yes for the 3% extension. And so we just need you to approve it.
I'm good for approval.
All right, we have to take public comment on this item?
Yeah.
It's funny that, hopefully you guys ratified, because we ratified, the contract, and I just want to thank the management team, in bringing the mediator, and helped out, so thank you.
All right, any other comments here in the room? Are there any online? All right, I'll turn to the board for action.
Good for approval.
Second.
By Director Dutra, second by Director Leonor, to ratify the labor agreement extension. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That passes unanimously.
Yeah.
And that brings us to adjournment. Thank you, everyone. Our next meeting will be a special meeting on July 13th, 9 a.m. here in this room, hopefully.
11 a.m.
Sorry, 11 a.m. Got that? Giving you a summer start time, 11 a.m. See you then.